Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is time for a round table that will be moderated by Denise Naniche from Global here in Barcelona, and myself, Julià Blanco from Caixa. We have 45 minutes to discuss about vaccines, and we will have 35 minutes for an open discussion. And then 10 minutes for questions from the audience. We have three invited speakers or members of this table that are Adolfo Garcia Sastre from the Global Health and Emerging Pathogens Institute of Icahn School of Medicine in New York. He's working on understanding the immunity against SARS-CoV-2 and also developing antivirals and vaccines against the virus. Our second invited is Daniel Prieto Alhambra. He's professor of pharmaco and device epidemiology at the University of Oxford. He has been working on analyzing large data sets from SARS-CoV-2 vaccinated cohorts, and he has done also an excellent work communicating vaccine development through media. And our last speaker is Èlia Torroella. She's R&D and Regulatory Affairs Director at HIPRA in Girona, Spain. HIPRA, as you know, is a company working on vaccines for animal health that has widened its focus to human health and is currently developing a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine that yesterday we learned that has been moved to phase 2 after preliminary approval by the Spanish Medicines Agency. So I think that this is an excellent panel for the discussion, and I would like to open the discussion with a very simple question. We have several vaccines that have been approved that have demonstrated high efficacy, around 90% against severe disease. So do we need more vaccines right now?
And I think I'll add to this, do we need more vaccines, and are RNA vaccines the end of the story? Do we need other types of vaccines?
So which is the order we should answer?
Yes.
This is absolutely open, but probably you are Èlia, you are the best person to answer that question.
Okay, so yes, we do. We need more vaccines to be developed. We are far away to have COVID under control, and we are being able to vaccinate a lot of people thanks to the first vaccines available, and that means RNA and adenoviruses, for example. But new generation vaccines are being developed, and for example, recombinant protein vaccines. This is an example. Maybe we could find other approaches, and I think that there is always a room for a good vaccine, providing quality and also maybe a better profile in terms of safety.
Yeah, maybe I can add here something. I also agree. We need more vaccines, or at least we need to try to see how the vaccines, vaccine approaches may actually have some more advantages than the vaccines that we have right now. The vaccines that we have right now are really good, are very effective, but are very difficult to deploy in some places. So we have some other approaches that are also very efficacious and that can be deployed more easily. That could be something that may help. I think that the main challenge right now is that the first priority is vaccinating as soon as possible. And therefore that makes quite difficult now efficacy studies for new vaccines to be done. Because basically what one would like to do is not so much to do an efficacy study for a new vaccine, but to vaccinate the people instead of doing more clinical trials. And that's one of the biggest challenges that there is right now. There is the possibility that there is acceptance of the vaccines through immunobridging, but this is still up there. And also the immunobridging, if it's been done at the end, it does not address the issue about efficacy against transmission, which most likely is not related with the levels of antibodies that one gets in blood, but with some other correlates, which make things a little bit more challenging for the next vaccines coming. I think they are needed. They are harder. The clinical development right now is harder because of how vaccine distribution is around, and then how to conduct efficacy studies.
Yeah, maybe to wrap this discussion up, I agree with what both Èlia and Adolfo said. I guess an additional point would be the potential additive effects of vaccine mixtures. So there's preliminary data, some data already available showing the value of mixing different types of vaccines. The ones that we have so far are RNA vaccines and adenovirus-based ones. And it could be that new vaccines that are being developed could add to that mix. In terms of safety, although we haven't got any safety problem that worries us, the kind of benefit risk is in an order of magnitude beneficial. There are, of course, very specific subgroups of people who could benefit from vaccines that have a different safety profile compared to the ones that we have available in the market. So I think, all for the more vaccines, the better, and the more varied vaccines, the better.
Thank you. Yes, I think you touched on very important points regarding the deployment of vaccines and how they can be mixed and matched moving forward. And also in terms of blocking transmission, as well as a severe disease. And in the next question, we'd like to ask you, never before has vaccine development been under such public scrutiny and become politicized and communicated, and we all know about when there's a vaccine adverse event, how this can be magnified in the public. And in terms of efficacy, we know that these vaccines are among the most efficacious we've ever had, but this is difficult to translate to the public with risk benefits. So I wondered how you see communication in future vaccine trials regarding efficacy, safety, as well as the risk benefit, which is also a difficult concept to transmit.
I think it's a difficult question because COVID, I think we cannot change too much in the way of communicating the results of the studies, because everyone is looking or trying to do a close follow-up on the new developments, and we are seeing in our new development in our vaccine, this is what we have, and it's what we have to face. So I think that the only way is to do things in the right way, to go ahead, to run the trials and to show the data, and the risk benefit is clear for the vaccines. Even knowing this, I still think that there is room for improvement. We can provide new vaccines which are as good as the ones in the market or even better, and with a different, let's say, different safety profile, or having less or a better tolerance, for example, after the administration. So I think we cannot change the way of communicating, because the scientific, on the scientific side and also on the politician wall, these vaccines are being followed up. So and also, well, I think this is what we have, and we have to show the results and explain in the right way, and convince the population that vaccination is good to have, and try to convince the ones thinking that it's better not to be vaccinated.
Yeah, communication is key. I mean, the previous talks also address the one from Caroline addressed the need of clear communication also, as well as the one of Clarice on the terms of vaccine hesitancy. I think the important thing is we need to have constant communication, transparent communication, not oversimplify, but also not make things very complex. Things are complex already, efficacy against severe disease, against hospitalization, against transmission. If I'm vaccinated, why I need to have a mask or not? There are some issues that are not easy, because as soon as you start to go into the little individual things that come with it, it's complex. So, but also one cannot complicate it too much. So it cannot be oversimplified, but it cannot be extremely complex. It needs to be very clear on what things are known and what things are not known at this moment, because things are changing. The risk benefits change according to how the risks are changing also. So it's different, the risk benefit for a boosting vaccine that for a primary vaccination. And that's also, and still you may have still the risk may be higher for not having boosting in some groups that the adverse events that you can get with a boost. But it's a different scale now. It's not the same scale as it is the primary vaccination. And it's important to communicate this, that is clear, it's understood what data they are right now, what data they are still lacking, and also saw all the time how the vaccination policies and vaccination coverage is affecting the number of cases that there is, so people can see right away how this is impacting one thing and the other. So that it's clear that what vaccination is achieving at this moment, and it needs to be constant. It needs to be because again, it's a complex issue at the end. Many things, many variables to have in mind. Many different groups, risk groups that have different possibilities of severe disease, and one needs to explain why it's important vaccination for all the groups, not only for the high risk groups. And what data is there that makes the decisions about vaccination?
Yeah, just to add to that, as Julià says, I have had quite a bit of communication on vaccines, mostly in Spain, but also a little bit in the UK. I think the biggest challenges are reaching the right audience. So we are not great, I think, at communicating the right message to the right people at each given time point. Like, we tend to have a very fixed channel of communication that we use for everyone, and that doesn't quite work, right? Like, when you want to vaccinate elderly people, it might be all right to use the usual TV and radio channels. When you want to vaccinate people in their 20s or in even younger people, you might need to move to TikTok or something else. So that is something that we are not very good at doing. I think, at least I am not. And that is something that we definitely need to work on, I think. Another big challenge, I think, is the communication of risk-benefit, taking into account not only the individual benefits, and this is quite unique to vaccines, right? So we are very used to communicating risk-benefit of medicines, but medicines typically only affect you. So when you are taking a treatment for breast cancer, it's only for you that there is a benefit and a risk. When you're taking a vaccine, there is a personal risk, a personal benefit, and on top of that, a community type of benefit that is harder to communicate. And I think that is still important, and I think people need to understand that, and the kind of citizenship value that carries. I think those are the main issues with communicating risk-benefit of vaccines, and of course, having the right people speaking about safety and benefit, right? It's very unfortunate when one sees the president of a country speaking about the risk or benefit of a vaccine, because that doesn't that doesn't carry any value really, and it's very easy to scrutinize and to get those people, ask them questions they cannot answer. So, we have seen that, and I would really appreciate if in the future we then see that again, because it's not what politicians are for. They should have people beside them capable of answering those questions if the questions arise.
And just to follow up on the risk benefit, we wanted to ask you what your thoughts are about what's been talked about a lot lately is vaccinating children. Because again, as you've all mentioned, the risk benefit is different for different populations, and we know that children are much less likely to get severe disease, and what your thoughts would be in the same area on children.
I can start if you want, Denise, just to follow up on that. So that is an interesting topic, of course, because the direct benefit to children themselves, with exceptions, of course, because there's children with, comorbidity, it's harder to kind of balance out compared to the risks. I think it's very important to communicate that the risks are very, very small indeed, and if you calculate the number needed to harm, we're talking, 1 in 500,000, 1 in 1,000,000. So it's a very, very small risk. I think what we have maybe failed to communicate here is the indirect benefit of vaccination to children in terms of their well-being, right? So I have 2 children, and I have seen what it is to have them, in a lockdown twice, because in the UK we managed to have 2 lockdowns, not only one, with more than 4 months of school closure in the last couple of years, and that is not nice. I think that is, for my luckily healthy children, that's probably one of the hardest experiences they've had. So I think using vaccines to prevent that, to minimize community transmission, and to prevent further non-pharmacological interventions is something that needs to be taken into account when we look at the risk benefit of vaccination. And that is also true for other vaccines, right? So many other vaccines that we use in children, we use them exactly to prevent that, to prevent outbreaks and to prevent community problems. So I think it's important to bear that in mind when we communicate about the risk benefit in the younger populations.
Yeah, with respect to kids, I mean, I'm here in the United States. I follow every time that there is a FDA request for approval of a new sector of the population. So I've been follow up the deliberations that they were done at the FDA with the Vaccine Advisory Committee that about the vaccination, the Pfizer data that they have for vaccination for the 5 years old to 11 years old. And they are really very, these are public, right? So these are public meetings. They are being put it also in the web, so one can always look at it. And they are very well presented. They make a good argument about the number of severe disease cases that can happen in this sector of the population according to the data that is available. And the number of potential adverse events that can happen. They extrapolate things also because the data are not with thousands and thousands of kids, but you can extrapolate things because a 12 years old is not so much different from an 11 years old. And these debates are really very, very, very interesting. And I think that one can, communicators can go into these sources, so to data sources that are the ones that at the end, they get the regulatory agencies the way to make the recommendation, and then extract the key points from this that is data driven in order to understand what could be the benefits of and the risks associated with vaccinations as soon as the vaccinations are being extended to another group or being approved for boosters or things like that. All of this is publicly available. And obviously not everybody needs to go and look at it. If they want, they can look at it, but at least communicators can go there and then extract the most of the data from that will allow us to make, at least to the community that they are addressing, a good information based on data.
Yes, in this case, as I'm not an expert in children, and I don't know that even the ones having a lot of expertise in this area have some doubts, and we have different ages, different situations. So I would avoid explaining a clear position on this topic, because I know that it's difficult for children having some disease. For example, this is clear, the risk benefit is clear. But for the other kind of children, I would leave this discussion to the experts, because I'm not an expert in children, and it's complicated, at least with the vaccines we have in Europe, for example, approved.
Okay. Thank you very much. So let's widen a little bit the focus of the vaccines. We have been talking about SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, but there are many other pathogens that can infect humans, and there are many potential pandemics right now. So in the case of SARS-CoV-2, the vaccine came in less than 1 year. This is something extraordinary. I couldn't believe at the beginning of the pandemics that the vaccine will be ready in less than 1 year. But we don't know what will happen with other pathogens. So the question is, can we have a roadmap for the development of vaccines, or also therapeutics, I mean antivirals, for any type of pathogen? And how can we prepare for the next pandemic, given the large diversity of the potential pathogens to come?
Before I want to make also a quick comment about the previous thing. The virus COVID-19 is going to become endemic. It's very clear. The vaccines are not going to be able to get rid of that. What does it mean that it becomes endemic? That means for the people during their whole life, there is only two ways how you are going to get exposed to COVID-19 antigen. Either through infection, because the virus is going to be circulating, maybe not now, maybe in 2 years, maybe in 4 years, maybe 6 years, or through vaccination. And that's something that is very important. So everybody's going to get in contact with this virus. And I think it's very important to take it into mind. Once that you get in contact with this virus, what risk do you have if you are vaccinated versus not vaccinated in terms of risk benefits, right? And that's a very important point that needs to keep in mind also. Sorry about it.
Completely agree. Yes. What I was about to say is that well, with COVID, we learned that there is another way to develop a vaccine. And for example, in Spain, what we learn is that when we put together the knowledge of the researchers and hospitals and private companies, we can do a lot. So we learned the methodology. We learned that we don't need to go from A to B to C and to Z. We can do things in parallel, always doing all the tasks, but we can run many tasks at the same time and trying to take decisions in advance. It's difficult to know which are going to be the diseases coming in the next years. And as we know that, and in different pathogen may need a different kind of vaccine, because I think it's difficult to have this roadmap saying, okay, if we have that kind of pathogen, we will approach the research that way or another way. But what we can do is to make sure that we have the kind of organization and coordination and have identified the people and the centers and the institutions to be involved in any new development. So if in the future we have a new pathogen or a new need, a new urgency, we will be able to go faster and to try to have more vaccines from the very beginning. So
fully agree. And I think that you have a lot of experience with many different pathogens in animal health. So
yes, we have many kinds. Some of them are the same or very similar to humans. In fact, we have coronaviruses in animals as well. And in our experience, each pathogen, each disease needs a different approach. The way you want to touch the immunity or the way to want to do things in the animal or human vaccinated. So for me, it's difficult to set up like kind of roadmap to say, okay, if we have that kind of disease, we would do it that way, but we can be ready and make sure that we know what we have to do from time zero and make sure that we have more vaccines available from the very beginning.
Yeah, and it's also very important. I mean, again, a pandemic is very difficult to predict what is going to be the pathogen, but it's also what it needs to be done early on. We know what it needs to be done early on, so we need to know right away or as soon as possible what are the ways how the pathogen is being transmitted, what are and also who are the risk groups, and what is the severity of disease that it causes. So that's something that this information that needs to be gathered immediately in order to be able how we need to respond to this pathogen with respect to that, and who we need to be more worried about in the population, that they need to be protected right away. We have seen that with SARS-CoV-2, what was the most vulnerable population, and that was also the reason why vaccination started mainly with in the beginning with the high risk group. So it's not only a question of developing vaccines quickly, but having also a plan how to distribute these vaccines in such a way that it will make the biggest impact right away from the moment of distribution.
Yeah, I think I don't want to miss the opportunity to praise the people who have developed the platforms that we have now, right? So I think both the adenovirus and the RNA platforms are amazing platforms, almost plug and play technologies that one can think can be used for future pandemics or for future pathogens. And I think that is a major advance, to human health in the future. And potentially other platforms will arise as well that will similarly adapt to new pathogens. It's just incredible to think that, for instance, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which is the closest I have geographically, was designed within days of the genotype of SARS-CoV-2 being published, right? And that is something that's basically, unthinkable 10 years ago. And I think we have to leverage from that. In terms of having something set up ready for the next pandemic, I think, as Adolfo said, the kind of surveillance that we need to have in place around the world is challenging, but extremely necessary. And we should have that always available. And we shouldn't, we should use this as a way to communicate problems when they arise and not to blame, because again, that's happened. There's been a lot of blame on the country where allegedly this pathogen originated, and I think that doesn't help really. I mean, what we need is to have a kind of virtuous circle of reporting, assessing, and evaluating and acting on new pathogens that needs to be open, transparent, and available to all the experts around the world, so that these pandemics can be tackled as quickly as possible.
Yes, thank you. I agree. I think that your last comment about blame is very important, and in linking to our previous discussion on communication. And to follow up a bit on what we've mentioned about high-risk populations being vaccinated earliest, also about how fast this went setting up platforms, this leads to the question of global equity and the problems that we have been having, as that we all know, in getting vaccines to the global south and to low-income countries. And so the question to you, and this is, the question that can be controversial or not, depending, is what kind of mechanisms can we have for ensuring a global equity to access? I mean, do we need an international regulation, patent waivers, technology transfer, other ways? Because we may see the same thing happening also with therapeutics coming out as with vaccines, with stockpiling, and with, of course, richer countries have more capacity to buy and to stockpile. And we need mechanisms in order to ensure that there is global equity. So I wondered what your thoughts are on this from the different areas that you're coming from on this aspect.
I think that when talking about vaccines, what we need is to have places or production plants with facilities and people trained and the knowledge to produce vaccines. I know that there is these discussions around the patents, and unfortunately, even if we would, we take the patents out of discussion and we say, okay, we don't have patents. We still need to have more production facilities and more people trained to produce this kind of products because, well, they are not easy to be produced. So for me, it's a matter of making sure that in different countries, different areas in the world, we have these structures, these companies, these organizations, whatever, to be able to produce these vaccines. And of course, to have the researchers and to make sure that we invest in the science, in innovation and in the research, because I completely agree, Dani, that thanks to these platforms that were ready at that moment, we were able to start vaccination of the population in 1 year. So it's important to invest also in science and in each country to make sure that we have the knowledge to react very fast if we have a new scenario like COVID.
I entirely second that, Èlia, and I think the importance of having an infrastructure to produce vaccines in less developed countries is paramount. I don't think that has been stressed enough. I think one of the conditions that Andrew Pollard and Sarah Gilbert imposed when there was a patent on the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was that it would be produced in several countries, including India, South Africa, countries where they knew vaccines would have a harder way to get, and I think that has been a big success that hasn't been stressed enough. I think it's not only the capacity to buy vaccines, is also the capacity to produce them that matters.
Yeah, and if I may add, I agree with everything that has been said, but if I may add, the problem with the developing countries is a chronic problem. It's not only related to access to COVID-19 vaccines. There are many diseases in developing countries that are preventable, that unfortunately they are still rampant there. It's not only COVID-19. They clearly need international help in order to set up the structures that are being needed in order to tackle public health issues. Again, it's not only COVID-19, it's also measles vaccination, it's also rotavirus vaccination, it's also control of mosquito-driven diseases. So it's also access to antivirals. I mean, it took a long time for people to get access to the HIV antivirals, and still is not perfect in countries like in Africa, when there is a lot of HIV infected people. So and the only way that this is if actually the international politicians, they get together and they take this seriously, and they put all the resources that are required to solve the inequity problems that there is in the developing countries. We can get them a little bit late, COVID-19 vaccines, but this still does not solve the problems that there is with public health in the developing countries.
Yes, fully agree. I think it is, as you mentioned, it is also a chronic problem, but there have been also breakthroughs when, as the example you gave with the HIV drugs, where there were also breakthroughs in terms of the pharmaceutical industry and generics. So that there are ways to facilitate it, but as you say, it's endemic, so it takes time.
I have a very quick question, because we have to start with the questions of the audience. But I would like to ask you about antivirals also. Just Adolfo mentioned antivirals, anti-HIV drugs. COVID pandemics has been controlled, or is being controlled, by vaccines. But HIV right now is being controlled by antivirals. So what's the place of antivirals in the fight against new pathogens? Or how do you see the development of antivirals in parallel to vaccines?
Yeah, well, these are two ways how to tackle the problem, right? And they're complementary. Vaccines, they are the ones that make the biggest impact, because they will diminish a lot the number of infections, but in many instances is not, they don't bring it to zero. So the question is what we do with the number of cases that still are remaining despite vaccination. There is not everybody, the vaccines are not 100% efficacious, and not everybody gets vaccinated neither. So there's going to be always disease. And the remaining cases that are after vaccination, they have been tackled with treatments. So there are two parts of that they need to be developed together to tackle infectious agents like COVID-19. And there's going to be need for antivirals and treatments even after the pandemic is over, hopefully over as sooner than later. But there's going to be need for these antiviral treatments as well as for continuous vaccination. So especially the people, the newborn people, that they will not have been exposed to vaccines, but still if the virus is around, they can be infected with the virus, right? So there are two parts for trying to prevent disease that are needed, and the same thing with diagnosis. I mean, everything needs to come together. Diagnosis, treatments, and vaccination, they are part of the fight against infectious diseases. And you cannot take out one without impacting the whole burden of disease.
Yes, I completely agree. I would like to have all of these tools. So let's try to prevent, but if you have, then when you need to treat, to have the tools to treat, it's important, and also to make the good diagnostics. So I completely agree. I don't have any additional thing to add to what you said before.
Maybe very, very briefly. I guess one difference between both that we've seen very earlier in the pandemic is this temptation to try existing antivirals as report post to treat a new pathogen, which of course you don't have with vaccines, right? So nobody thought that we could give flu vaccines to prevent COVID, but people thought that we could give hydroxychloroquine or lopinavir to prevent.
Wait a second. There were some people that were promoting polio vaccination to prevent BCG vaccination to prevent COVID-19.
You are right.
So this happens also with vaccines.
Yeah, but less so than with antivirals, right? Which were given, we had a point in Spain where 80% of the people admitted to hospital were on hydroxychloroquine and 50% on lopinavir and ritonavir. So I think there is. I just want to raise the flag for awareness that whenever we have a new pathogen, we have to do things right, and we have to randomize people, to make sure that the treatments we think work do indeed work, even if they are there and available, because that's the only way we've gotten out of that corner where we got ourselves in at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, very important point.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think we'll move on. Now we have some questions from the audience that we will group a few of them that tend to be on a similar subject. So I'll start with the first one that comes from Narcís Salvi, that is, do you think that mRNA will substitute all vaccines? Or on the other hand, mRNA will provide first-line defense, and then classical non-mRNA vaccines will provide long-term protection and scheduled vaccinations?
I think that mRNA is a good platform, very good platform, not only for vaccines or for, against infectious disease, but also with against other pathologies. But the world will not end with RNA. Each disease needs a different approach sometimes, and it's a good tool, as I said before, but there are other approaches for a vaccine, like a recombinant vaccine or vectorized in other circumstances, which are good approaches too. So RNA is very good, but we need to learn still a lot regarding RNA. So I would not avoid, or I would not only focus in RNA. I think there are other platforms which can also have some advantages, like distribution and other kind of supply and other kind of
There are one more approach, right? One more thing that we have now in our fights against infectious diseases. That's great. Substituting everything, I think, is too much. There is even some vaccines for bacteria that are based on the polysaccharides, right? And obviously you cannot get the polysaccharide antigen through mRNA. So it depends also of the antigen, the nature of the protective antigen. Whether it is a protein, in which case, yes, you can still express as mRNA. But if it's not a protein, then it's going to be very difficult for an mRNA vaccine to be able to protect with an for expressing an antigen. This is not a protein. But so this is not without saying that this is great to have one more way how to fight infectious diseases through vaccination. I think there is a lot of potential for other diseases for mRNA. That's great. Some other things may not be able to be tackled with mRNA, but there are some other ways.
Nothing to add.
Okay. There is an additional question that is also related to the RNA platforms. Is how long would it take to have a new vaccine with the new mRNA platform or the new vector platforms? Right. And obviously they are the fastest one, but which is the fastest?
All of them, they are very fast. So there may be a difference of 2 weeks, perhaps. But I think the vaccine development depends more on potential challenges that you may encounter while development. Which many times they are unpredictable, and they may delay vaccine development. That actually a platform being faster than others. In general, expression of recombinant proteins may be a little bit harder for some proteins, but for some other proteins it's very fast too. So it just depends.
Yeah, I guess it's important to recognize that after you have the vaccine, you have to test it and prove that it's beneficial and not very risky, right? And again, maybe going back to the issue of communication, maybe something we haven't communicated too well is the vaccines that didn't quite make it, because people now in our, people who don't like, anti-vaxxers and people who don't believe in vaccines say, oh, how come we got this so quickly with no failures? And there are failures out there, and we need to learn from them and recognize them, right? So I think, as Adolfo said, it's not the kind of vaccine itself, it's testing it and making sure that it works and it's safe, that takes time and where the challenges tend to arise.
Okay, yes, I think we're all in agreement here that fast is good. It also depends on the incentive and the investment put into it, which in this case, of course, we know was huge for COVID, but in other cases, for diseases affecting maybe only poorer countries, there isn't as much. The speed isn't the same. So another question here we have from the public is, how easy will it be to conduct randomized clinical trials with new vaccines in rich countries? Will this mean that those new vaccines would need to be tested in low and middle income countries where unfortunately there are less vaccinated people? Are there problems anticipated for testing new vaccines and finding non-vaccinated people for the clinical trials?
I think I can answer this. I guess it's related to COVID because this is what we are facing in the new clinical studies. Well, it's just a matter of making a different kind of protocols, and the European Medicines Agency, they are aware about this, and it's true that you cannot prove efficacy based on cases, let's say that, but you have, at least in our case, what we have to do is to compare our vaccine with one of the already approved vaccines and make sure that show or prove the non-inferiority, for example. So there are ways around this, and of course, as when you develop a vaccine, you run clinical studies in different areas in the world. So it's still possible to conduct clinical studies in a country where you are able to do the primary vaccination and or the full vaccination plan. So, but in Europe, this is clear. The protocols are changing, and there is a new scenario to go ahead with the clinical studies, but possible, and the authorities, they know, and it's just a matter of reaching an agreement on the kind of protocol you will follow.
I think despite that is a little bit more challenging, right? I think I addressed that in the beginning. There's not so easy to find naive people in some countries. The only naive people that there is people that they don't want to get vaccinated. So and then you need also to go to another sectors more quickly, perhaps less vaccination, like kids. There are some ways around, but they are now a little bit more challenging than what it was to test it in the beginning.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, I think we have time for a last quick question. The question is, the rate of vaccination is very different among the countries. What's your point of view about that? I think that you comment on that before. So, but there is a second question that is maybe more relevant. How does it is affecting the efficacy of the global vaccination? So this is these inequities will have a negative impact on vaccination efficacy.
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe the risk, of course, is that by not vaccinating in some countries and letting them have more community transmission, there is more risk of new variants of the virus arising, right? At the same time, I think we must recognize that actually we are not doing a great job in Europe either at minimizing transmission even after vaccination. So in theory, it is true that vaccine inequity could be hampering our efforts, but at the same time, it's also true that in countries where we have vaccinated really nicely and really early, we are still having trouble minimizing transmission, and we are probably similarly responsible for not following any sort of recommendation or relaxing them too quickly, and that can also, of course, cause trouble, even potentially more so because you have already vaccinated most of the people, and new variants could be reinforced if they evade vaccine immunity.
Yes, I think that I completely agree. I think this is a global problem, and we have to vaccinate everyone in the planet. So, or at least as much as we can vaccinate, the better. So keep pushing here and in all the countries, and of course using masks and everything else. So there is still a lot of work to do in terms of vaccination in Europe and also outside of Europe as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing to add.
Well, I think on this note, we've just gone a bit over time. Thank you very much. We both thank you very much for your contributions. I think it's been a very interesting debate discussion where we've covered many different aspects of vaccines and being ready for the future, but also the COVID vaccination that we're going through these days. And so a warm thank you to all of you. And then a reminder that we'll be back tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. with the session on zoonoses and One Health, and then a session on transforming public health, followed by pitches for 5 innovation projects. And that will complete the conference. So again, thank you to all who've been listening and following and asking questions, and thank you to the roundtable.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Bye.